A dark woman named Sarah was asked to leave a private jet lounge. She bought the airline and fired everyone. As the elegant dark woman stepped into the lavish private jet lounge, her confidence turned heads. But it wasn't long before the icy stares of the staff turned into outright hostility. "This lounge is for VIPs only," the manager sneered, gesturing toward the exit. Little did they know, the woman they had just insulted wasn't just any traveler. She was about to change their lives forever in a way they'd never see coming. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. The private jet lounge sparkled with an air of exclusivity. Polished marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, and the subtle scent of expensive cologne mingled with freshly brewed espresso. A hushed stillness cloaked the room, broken only by the occasional clink of crystal glasses or the low murmur of conversation. It was a haven designed for the elite, a place where every detail whispered wealth and privilege. Sarah paused at the entrance, her heels clicking against the floor with steady confidence. Her caramel skin seemed to glow under the warm lights, and her tailored navy blue blazer emphasized her commanding presence. Her natural curls, styled in a sleek updo, framed her face with elegance. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a sense of purpose in the other. Sarah was no stranger to spaces like this. She had built her life and her empire by walking into rooms that weren't designed for her, owning them with quiet determination. Her eyes swept the lounge, noting the clusters of sharply dressed travelers. A pair of businessmen discussed mergers over cocktails. A silver-haired woman leafed through a glossy magazine, her diamond necklace catching the light. Sarah exhaled softly, allowing herself a moment to adjust to the atmosphere. She wasn't intimidated. She had fought too hard to be here. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, Sarah's childhood had been shaped by her mother's resilience and her father's unwavering belief in her potential. They had always told her, "You don't need to be invited. You make your own place." And she had. As Sarah approached the check-in counter, her stride was deliberate, her every movement reflecting the success she had earned. She was no longer the girl who had to prove her worth. She was a woman who commanded respect. "Good afternoon," she greeted the receptionist with a warm but firm tone. Her voice carried the kind of calm confidence that demanded attention without ever having to raise in volume. The receptionist, a young woman with a practiced smile, glanced up. There was a flicker of hesitation, a brief moment where her gaze darted to Sarah's face and then away, as if calculating whether she belonged. But Sarah stood tall, her posture unyielding. "I'm here for the private jet to Geneva," Sarah continued, sliding her boarding pass across the counter. The receptionist took it, her fingers lingering just a moment too long. "Of course, miss." She glanced at the name, Sarah Kincaid. There it was, a fleeting pause, the faint narrowing of eyes. It was subtle, but Sarah noticed it. She always did. Years of experience had sharpened her instincts. She could sense the shift in the air, the unspoken judgment that often preceded a dismissal. Sarah smiled, unbothered. She had dealt with this before, and she would handle it now. "You'll find the lounge just to your right," the receptionist finally said, her voice tight. "Thank you," Sarah nodded and walked on, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble. Inside, she found an empty seat by the window where she could see the runway stretching into the horizon. The hum of jet engines in the distance blended with the ambient jazz playing softly in the background. She settled into her chair, unfolding a document from her briefcase, but her focus lingered on the room. Sarah had learned to read spaces like these, the subtle glances, the whispers behind manicured hands. It was a skill honed over years of navigating a world that hadn't been designed for her, yet she didn't shrink in the face of it. Instead, she let it fuel her resolve. Outside, the sky had begun to turn a soft gold, the sun dipping toward the horizon. For Sarah, it was another reminder of how far she had come, but also how far she still had to go. She reached for her phone, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of its case. A notification blinked on the screen, a message from her assistant confirming her upcoming meeting. Sarah smiled faintly. The meeting was critical, not just for her company, but for what it symbolized. Sarah glanced around the room one last time, her eyes settling on the receptionist speaking with a flight attendant. Something about their body language, the quick whispers, the subtle side glances made her pause. She straightened slightly, her instincts on alert. The weight of their stares fell on her, but Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, her expression calm, almost regal. If they thought they could rattle her, they were about to be sorely mistaken. Sarah Kincaid had faced bigger storms than this. The tension in the air was palpable even before the confrontation began. Sarah could feel it, the whispers, the side glances, the way the flight attendant's gaze lingered on her before darting away. She wasn't new to this. It always started the same way. The scrutiny, the polite but icy demeanor, the unspoken question that hung between them like an accusation. But this time, it felt different. Sarah had returned her attention to her documents, reviewing the key points for her meeting in Geneva, when she heard the soft click of approaching heels. She looked up, her face neutral, as a flight attendant stepped into view. The woman was tall and impeccably dressed in the airline's uniform, a sleek navy suit with silver accents. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her expression was perfectly composed, though Sarah could see the tightness around her mouth, the way her lips pressed together just a little too hard. "Excuse me, ma'am," the flight attendant began, her voice honeyed but with an unmistakable edge. She stood a little too close, her presence invasive. Sarah folded her hands neatly over her papers and looked up with a calm but pointed gaze. "Yes." The attendant's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This lounge is reserved for private jet passengers only." The words were delivered smoothly, as if rehearsed, but Sarah caught the faint inflection, the unspoken suggestion that she didn't belong. "There's no misunderstanding," Sarah replied evenly. She reached for her boarding pass, holding it up. "I'm on the private jet to Geneva." The attendant didn't take the pass. Instead, she glanced at it briefly, her smile tightening. "I see," she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. "But sometimes mistakes happen with these passes." Sarah felt a flicker of heat rise in her chest. She had encountered many variations of this scenario, but the insinuation, cloaked in faux politeness, always had a way of stinging. "There's no mistake," Sarah said firmly, her voice steady but carrying a quiet authority. "I suggest you verify it." The attendant hesitated, her composure wavering for just a second. Then, with a curt nod, she stepped back, signaling to the receptionist who had greeted Sarah earlier. The two exchanged whispered words, their glances flicking back to Sarah like moths drawn to a flame. Sarah sat still, her spine straight and her face calm, though her mind was racing. She hated this feeling, the need to prove herself, to fight for a space she had every right to occupy. Moments later, the flight attendant returned, this time without the pretense of a smile. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we need to ask you to leave the lounge." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her fingers tightening slightly around the armrest of her chair. "On what grounds?" "Your pass." The woman faltered, then squared her shoulders. "It doesn't seem to be valid for this lounge." Sarah let the silence stretch between them, allowing the weight of the attendant's words to settle. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her now, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. "My pass is valid," Sarah said at last, her voice as calm as a still lake, though there was an unmistakable edge of steel beneath her words. She rose from her seat slowly, her every movement deliberate. "If you have an issue, I suggest you take it up with your supervisor." The attendant's face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. "Ma'am, we've already checked. If you refuse to leave, we'll have no choice but to involve security." The threat hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Sarah tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Security?" she repeated, her tone soft but loaded with incredulity. The attendant faltered again, but before she could respond, Sarah stepped closer, her presence commanding. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. The power in her voice came from its quiet conviction. "You're making a mistake," Sarah said, her words slow and deliberate. "I'll leave, but trust me when I say this isn't over." The attendant blinked, clearly caught off guard by Sarah's calm defiance. For a moment, she seemed uncertain, but then she straightened, as if to reassert her authority. "That's your choice, ma'am," she said stiffly. Sarah didn't respond. She gathered her things with an air of dignity, her movements unhurried, as if to show that no amount of pettiness could rattle her. As she turned to leave, She caught sight of the receptionist watching her, a flicker of guilt flashing across her face. The room seemed to hold its breath as Sarah walked out, her head held high. She could feel the weight of every gaze on her back, the whispers that would surely follow, but she didn't look back. Out in the corridor, the tension began to ease from her shoulders, replaced by a simmering resolve. This wasn't the first time she had been underestimated, dismissed, or disrespected, but it would be the last time today. Sarah paused by a large window overlooking the runway, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. The soft glow of the setting sun bathed her face in gold, but her eyes were cold and calculating. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself, her fingers tightening around the handle of her briefcase, and she meant it. The corridor outside the lounge was quiet, but Sarah's mind was anything but. Her pulse thrummed steadily, a slow burn building beneath her composed exterior. The humiliation she had just endured lingered in the air around her, tightening her chest like a steel band. She gripped the handle of her briefcase a little harder than necessary, the cool leather grounding her. She turned toward the large windows lining the hall. The expanse of the runway stretched before her, bathed in the soft amber light of the setting sun. The view should have calmed her, but all she could see in her mind's eye was the smug, patronizing look on the flight attendant's face. Sarah exhaled slowly, steadying herself. This wasn't the time to let anger cloud her judgment. Every battle she had won, every obstacle she had overcome, had been because she refused to let moments like this break her. But this wasn't just a moment. This was another blatant reminder of a system designed to undermine people like her. The injustice of it gnawed at her, sharper with each passing second. As she stood by the window, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, the name of her assistant, Brenda, flashing on the screen. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "Brenda," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing within her. "Miss Kincaid, I've just finalized the acquisition papers," Brenda said on the other end, her voice professional but with an undertone of excitement. "Congratulations, you now own a controlling stake in Continental Airlines." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened, the irony of the timing not lost on her. She turned her gaze back toward the lounge, where the flight attendant and receptionist were likely still discussing her, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. "Thank you, Brenda," Sarah said after a moment, her tone calm, but her eyes flashed with a newfound intensity. "I'll handle the next steps personally." "Understood," Brenda replied, and the line went dead. Sarah slipped the phone back into her pocket, her mind already calculating her next move. She was tired of being underestimated, tired of being judged by the color of her skin, her gender, her mere presence in spaces where she was constantly made to feel unwelcome. She straightened her shoulders, her reflection in the window now one of quiet determination. "They wanted me out of their lounge, fine. Let's see how they handle what comes next." Sarah turned and walked back toward the lounge, her heels clicking against the polished floor with a steady, deliberate rhythm. She didn't bother to mask the intensity in her expression now. Anyone who crossed her path instinctively stepped aside, sensing the force of her resolve. As she approached the lounge entrance, the receptionist's eyes widened in surprise. She quickly tried to mask it, plastering on a strained smile. "Ma'am, I thought wrong," Sarah interrupted, her voice low but firm. Before the receptionist could respond, the flight attendant appeared from behind the counter, her expression quickly shifting from surprise to irritation. "Ma'am, I believe we already asked you to leave," the attendant said, her tone clipped. "And I believe I told you this isn't over," Sarah replied, her words precise and cutting. She stepped closer, her presence towering, despite the physical distance between them. The flight attendant faltered, but only for a moment. "If you're going to cause a disturbance, we'll have to call security." Sarah smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Oh, you'll be calling someone, but it won't be security." The attendant's brow furrowed, clearly confused. "Excuse me." Sarah reached into her briefcase, pulling out a sleek folder embossed with the logo of Continental Airlines. She placed it on the counter, her movements measured. The receptionist leaned closer, her curiosity getting the better of her, while the flight attendant's expression turned wary. "This," Sarah said, tapping the folder, "is a copy of the finalized acquisition papers for Continental Airlines. As of 20 minutes ago, I own a controlling stake in this company." The receptionist gasped audibly, while the flight attendant's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Sarah didn't give her a chance to recover. And now, as the owner, I'm here to address the blatant discrimination I just experienced. You had the audacity to humiliate me in front of a room full of passengers, to question my integrity and my right to be here, simply because of how I look. The flight attendant stammered. Ma'am, I know. Sarah cut her off, her voice sharp and unwavering. You don't get to explain this away. Not this time. The lounge had gone silent, every eye now fixed on Sarah. Passengers who had previously averted their gazes now watched with open curiosity, some with admiration, others with shock. Sarah turned toward the receptionist, her tone softening slightly, but losing none of its authority. I want a list of every staff member on duty right now. Effective immediately, you're all relieved of your positions. The flight attendant's jaw dropped. You can't do that. Sarah turned back to her, her gaze cold. I just did. The confrontation dragged on, the flight attendant growing more desperate with every passing moment. She begged, pleaded, even tried to justify her actions, but Sarah remained unmoved. This wasn't about personal revenge, it was about setting a precedent. By the time Sarah left the lounge, the staff had been dismissed, their pleas echoing faintly behind her. She walked away with her head held high, knowing she had sent a clear message. Discrimination had no place in her world. Sarah left the lounge, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floors of the airport terminal. The sound echoed in the silence that surrounded her, a silence filled with the weight of what had just transpired. Each step was deliberate, a physical manifestation of the resolve coursing through her veins. The hallway ahead stretched long and empty, but Sarah's destination wasn't far. She reached the nearest elevator, pressing the button with a calm exterior that belied the fire burning inside her. As she waited, she glanced at her reflection in the elevator doors. Her face was composed, but her eyes held a fierce determination. Moments later, the elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open. She stepped inside, selecting the floor where the airline's airport management team was based. The ride up was smooth and eerily quiet, giving Sarah time to collect her thoughts. This wasn't just about what had happened in the lounge. It was about the systemic issues that allowed people like that flight attendant to behave so brazenly. Sarah had worked too hard to build her empire, to shatter the glass ceilings that tried to contain her, only to be reduced to assumptions about her worth based on appearances. The elevator slowed, and with a soft ding, the doors opened to reveal a sleek office space bustling with activity. Airline staff moved quickly, their conversations blending into a low hum. The receptionist at the front desk looked up as Sarah approached, her expression polite but curious. Good afternoon, Sarah said, her tone firm but professional. I'm here to speak with the airport operations manager. The receptionist blinked momentarily, caught off guard by Sarah's directness. Do you have an appointment, ma'am? No, Sarah replied smoothly. But I suggest you let them know Sarah Kincaid is here. The name landed like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples through the air. The receptionist's expression shifted subtly, her eyes widening as recognition dawned. Without another word, she picked up the phone, her voice low but urgent. Sarah didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped aside, positioning herself by the large windows overlooking the tarmac. She could see planes taxiing in the distance, their sleek forms glinting in the sunlight. It was a reminder of the scale of her acquisition, a reminder of the power she now held. Miss Kincaid. The voice came from behind her, tentative but respectful. Sarah turned to see a man in his late 50s approaching. His graying hair was neatly combed, and his suit was crisp, but there was a nervous energy in his demeanor. Yes, Sarah said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze steady. I'm Kevin Ford, the operations manager, he said, shaking her hand. It's an honor to meet you. I wasn't expecting, I don't imagine you were, Sarah interrupted gently but firmly. But there's an issue that requires immediate attention. Kevin gestured toward a nearby conference room. Of course, please, let's discuss it in private. Sarah followed him into the room, the heavy glass door closing behind them. The space was modern, with a long table and high-backed chairs. Kevin gestured for her to sit, but Sarah remained standing, her posture straight and commanding. I'll get straight to the point, she began, her tone calm but unyielding. This morning, I was subjected to blatant discrimination by your staff in the private jet lounge. I was humiliated, dismissed, and accused of falsifying my boarding pass. Kevin's face paled. Miss Kincaid, I assure you, this is not how we operate. This isn't just about me, Sarah interrupted, her voice sharpening. It's about the culture you've allowed to fester here. If this is how your staff treats someone they think doesn't belong, imagine how many others have been subjected to the same treatment, people without the resources or the platform to fight back. Kevin swallowed hard, his hands clasping nervously in front of him. I take these allegations very seriously, Miss Kincaid. Rest assured, we will conduct a full investigation. No, Sarah said, cutting him off again. This isn't just about investigations and reports. It's about accountability and action. As the new owner, I'm implementing immediate changes. She reached into her briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents. She placed them on the table with deliberate precision. This outlines a comprehensive plan for diversity training, stricter accountability measures, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, Sarah said, her voice steady. Every employee, from top management to ground staff, will undergo mandatory training. Anyone who refuses will no longer have a place in this organization. Kevin stared at the documents, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. This is thorough, he murmured. It has to be, Sarah said firmly. This isn't just about optics. It's about creating an environment where every passenger is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or how they look. Kevin nodded slowly, his respect for Sarah evident. You have my full support, Miss Kincaid. I'll ensure these changes are implemented immediately. Sarah allowed a small smile to break through her serious demeanor. Good, because the world is watching, Mr. Ford, and so am I. She turned to leave, her heels clicking against the polished floor once more, but this time, the sound wasn't just a reminder of her presence. It was a declaration of her power. Sarah Kincaid wasn't just a passenger in this journey. She was the captain, and she was steering the airline into a new era. As Sarah stepped out of the office, the hum of the airport around her seemed to recede. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders, replaced by a sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she had never been one to shy away from a challenge. Sarah returned to her hotel that evening, the soft hum of the elevator fading as she stepped into her suite. The room was bathed in the golden hues of a setting sun, its warmth spilling across the plush furnishings and polished wooden floors. The quiet should have been comforting, but Sarah's mind was a storm of thoughts. She walked to the wide window overlooking the city. Lights were beginning to flicker on below, painting a picture of bustling life. Her reflection stared back at her, calm and poised, but Sarah felt the weight of the day pressing against her chest. With a deep breath, she placed her briefcase on the desk and sank into the chair beside it. The events of the lounge replayed in her mind like a reel she couldn't turn off. The flight attendant's condescending tone, the humiliation she had endured, the whispers of passengers who didn't stand up for her. It wasn't just the incident, it was what it represented. Sarah thought of her parents, who had worked tirelessly to give her a chance at a life they could only dream of. She thought of the countless others who faced similar indignities every day without the resources to fight back. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Brenda. Sarah picked up, her voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. Brenda, she said. Miss Kincaid, Brenda began, her tone professional, but edged with excitement. I've already drafted the internal memo about the new policies you outlined. It will be distributed to all staff by tomorrow morning. Sarah nodded, even though Brenda couldn't see her. Good. This needs to happen immediately. There's one more thing, Brenda added after a brief pause. I've received a call from a journalist who caught wind of the incident at the lounge. They're asking for a statement. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. She had expected this. The airline's reputation was already under scrutiny, and a story like this would only add fuel to the fire. But she wasn't interested in scandal for scandal's sake. She wanted change. No statement, Sarah said firmly. Not yet. I want the actions we take to speak louder than words. Let them see the changes before they hear about them. Understood, Brenda replied. Sarah ended the call and leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting to the skyline. The city below was alive, pulsing with energy, and for the first time that day, Sarah allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. The following morning, Sarah arrived at the airline's corporate headquarters. The towering glass building reflected the sunlight, a symbol of power and influence. But Sarah knew that what mattered most was what happened inside. She entered the lobby, her presence immediately commanding attention. Executives in tailored suits paused their conversations, their eyes following her as she walked to the reception desk. "I'm here for the board meeting," Sarah said, her tone calm but firm. The receptionist nodded quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she directed Sarah to the elevator. The ride to the top floor was smooth and silent. Sarah stood tall, her reflection in the mirrored walls a picture of composure. But beneath her calm exterior, her resolve burned brighter than ever. The boardroom was a grand space, its long tables surrounded by leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city. The board members were already seated, their murmurs fading as Sarah entered. "Miss Kincaid," the chairman greeted her, rising from his seat. His tone was polite, but Sarah could sense the unease in his eyes. "Good morning," Sarah replied, taking her place at the head of the table. The meeting began with formalities, financial reports, operational updates, but Sarah's focus remained sharp. When the discussion shifted to the incident at the lounge, all eyes turned to her. "We've reviewed the situation," the chairman said, his tone cautious, "and we believe the staff involved should be reprimanded appropriately." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her voice carried the weight of her authority. "Reprimanded?" she repeated, her gaze sweeping the room. "This isn't a matter of reprimand. It's a matter of accountability." The room fell silent. What happened in that lounge is a reflection of deeper, systemic issues within this organization. Sarah continued, "It's not enough to address the symptoms. We need to address the cause." One of the board members, a middle-aged man with a sharp suit and an even sharper tone, leaned forward. "Miss Kincaid, with all due respect, this is an isolated incident. The staff involved made a mistake. Surely we don't need to overreact." Sarah turned her gaze to him, her eyes like steel. "An isolated incident?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting. "How many isolated incidents do you think go unnoticed every day? How many passengers are made to feel unwelcome, dismissed, or disrespected because of assumptions about who they are?" The man faltered, but Sarah didn't let up. "I'm not here to overreact," she said. "I'm here to ensure that this airline becomes a symbol of equality and respect. If that means making difficult decisions, so be it." The room was silent, the weight of Sarah's words settling over the board like a heavy fog. "I've already implemented changes at the operational level," she continued, "but I expect this board to support those changes fully. Anything less is unacceptable." One by one, the board members nodded, their resistance crumbling under Sarah's unwavering resolve. The chairman spoke at last, his voice subdued but sincere. "You have our support, Miss Kincaid." Sarah inclined her head slightly, her expression unreadable, but as she left the boardroom, her heart beat steady with the knowledge that she had taken another step toward lasting change. That evening, Sarah sat by the window of her suite, the city lights stretching far into the distance. The battle wasn't over, far from it, but she had made her mark, and she wasn't stopping anytime soon. The soft glow of the setting sun painted the walls of Sarah's office in hues of gold and amber. It had been a long day, but the work was far from over. Sarah sat at her desk, the hum of the city below muffled by the thick glass windows. Before her lay a stack of documents, reports detailing employee conduct, letters of apology from staff, and a draft of the new policies she had proposed during the board meeting. She picked up a pen, its weight familiar in her hand, and began signing off on the final approvals. Every stroke felt like a small victory, a tangible step toward dismantling the system that had allowed discrimination to thrive unchecked. But as much as these moments were satisfying, Sarah knew they were only the beginning. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk, the screen lighting up with a text from Brenda. "The first wave of terminations has been completed. All affected employees have been notified." Sarah stared at the message for a moment, her emotions a complicated mix of resolve and reflection. She had no intention of relishing in anyone's downfall, but she also knew that meaningful change required difficult decisions. The following day, Sarah returned to the airport for a scheduled inspection of the lounge and to observe the first round of diversity training. The drive there was uneventful, the city a blur of motion outside her car window. But as the airport loomed closer, a sense of anticipation settled over her. This wasn't just a visit, it was a statement. When Sarah stepped into the lounge, the atmosphere was markedly different from her last visit. The staff who greeted her now wore expressions of respect, their posture straight and attentive. The receptionist from before, a younger woman who had watched the previous day's events unfold with discomfort, looked nervous but determined as she approached Sarah. "Miss Kincaid," the receptionist began, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "Welcome back. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." Sarah nodded, her expression calm but unreadable. "Thank you. I'd like a full tour of the lounge before the training session begins." "Of course," the receptionist said quickly, gesturing for Sarah to follow her. As they walked, Sarah observed everything with a critical eye. The lounge itself hadn't changed. Its polished marble floors and opulent furnishings still exuded luxury. But the energy was different. There was a quiet hum of activity, a sense of order and professionalism that had been absent before. When they reached the conference room where the training was scheduled, Sarah paused at the door. Inside, a group of employees sat in neat rows, their expressions ranging from curious to apprehensive. A facilitator stood at the front, arranging materials and preparing for the session. Sarah turned to the receptionist. "How has the staff responded to the changes so far?" The receptionist hesitated, her gaze dropping for a moment before meeting Sarah's eyes. "There's been some resistance," she admitted, "but most of us were ready to change. We want to do better." Sarah studied her for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "That's good to hear," she said. "Change isn't easy, but it's necessary." The receptionist nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. The training session began shortly after, and Sarah stayed to observe. The facilitator, a seasoned expert in workplace diversity and inclusion, started with an exercise designed to confront unconscious bias. Employees were asked to reflect on their own experiences, to consider how their actions or inactions might contribute to a culture of exclusion. At first, there was hesitation. Employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their expressions guarded. But as the session progressed, something began to shift. One by one, staff members shared their thoughts, their voices tinged with vulnerability and a desire to grow. "I never realized how my assumptions could affect someone else," one of the flight attendants admitted, her voice quiet but earnest. "I thought I was just doing my job, but now I see how much harm I could cause." Sarah listened silently from the back of the room, her arms crossed as she leaned against the wall. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. This wasn't her moment, it was theirs. The facilitator wrapped up the session with a powerful reminder. Change starts with awareness, but it's sustained through action. It's not enough to know better. You have to do better. As the employees filed out of the room, some approached Sarah hesitantly, their faces reflecting a mix of respect and uncertainty. "Miss Kincaid," one of them said, a young man with neatly combed hair and an earnest expression, "I just wanted to say thank you for giving us a chance to learn from our mistakes." Sarah met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "The real thanks will come when your actions reflect what you've learned. Words are a start, but they're not enough." The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. That evening, Sarah returned to her hotel with a sense of quiet accomplishment. The day had been productive, but she knew there was still much work to be done. Change didn't happen overnight. It was a process, a journey that required constant vigilance and effort. She sat by the window, the city lights stretching far into the horizon, and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. This fight wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed, disrespected, or devalued because of who they were. As she sipped her tea, her mind drifted to her next steps. She would continue to push for systemic change, to challenge the status quo at every turn. Because Sarah Kincaid wasn't just fighting for justice. She was building a legacy, and she wasn't done yet. The morning dawned quiet and overcast, the sunlight muted behind a veil of clouds. Sarah sat in the back seat of her car as it wound through the city streets toward the airport once again. The previous day's events still lingered in her mind, the faces of the staff members etched into her memory. Some had shown remorse, others had remained guarded, unwilling to let go of their defenses. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted as the car slowed in front of the terminal. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement, the sound crisp in the early morning stillness. Today was about follow-up, about ensuring that the changes she had implemented weren't just words on paper, but actions in motion. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere felt different. The lounge staff now wore crisp uniforms, their movements purposeful and professional. Sarah could see the subtle shift in their demeanor. a newfound attentiveness, a quiet determination to rebuild what had been broken. But not everything had changed. As she approached the lounge, Sarah noticed Yvette, the flight attendant who had initiated the confrontation, standing near the counter. Yvette's posture was stiff, her expression carefully neutral. She glanced at Sarah, her lips pressing into a thin line, but said nothing. Sarah's steps slowed, her gaze locking onto Yvette's. This wasn't the first time she had encountered someone unwilling to confront their mistakes, but it always carried a weight of its own. She paused a few feet away, allowing the silence to stretch between them. "Yvette," Sarah said at last, her voice calm but firm. The woman's eyes flicked to Sarah's, her expression a mixture of defiance and unease. "Miss Kincaid," she replied, her tone clipped. Sarah folded her arms, her gaze steady. "I see you're still here. I take it you've chosen to participate in the training sessions." Yvette hesitated, her jaw tightening. "I didn't have much of a choice," she said, her voice low. "It was either that or lose my job." "And how do you feel about that?" Sarah asked, her tone even. Yvette's eyes darted away, her defenses rising. "I'm doing what I have to do," she said, "but I stand by what I said before. I was just doing my job." Sarah's expression didn't waver, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, disappointment, perhaps, or resolve. "You think dismissing and humiliating someone is part of your job?" Yvette flinched, the words landing harder than she anticipated. "I didn't mean it like that," she muttered. "How did you mean it?" Sarah pressed, her voice sharp now. "Because from where I stood, it looked like you made a snap judgment about who I was and decided I didn't belong." Yvette opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated, the words catching in her throat. For the first time, her defiance cracked, giving way to something more vulnerable. "I didn't think about it," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't personal. I was just following protocol." "Following protocol," Sarah repeated, her tone laced with incredulity. "Yvette, do you know how many times I've heard that excuse? It's the shield people use to avoid accountability, to avoid admitting that their actions have consequences." Yvette's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in. "Tu didn't mean to offend you," she said after a moment, her voice quiet. "But you did," Sarah replied, her tone softening but losing none of its edge. "And it's not just about me. It's about every person who's ever been dismissed or disrespected because someone decided they didn't fit the mold of who belonged." Yvette looked down, her hands twisting nervously. "I don't know what else to say," she murmured. Sarah sighed, her posture relaxing slightly. "Say that you're willing to change," she said. "That you're willing to do better, not because you have to, but because it's the right thing to do." There was a long silence, the weight of Sarah's words hanging in the air. Finally, Yvette looked up, her eyes meeting Sarah's with a newfound clarity. "I want to change," she said quietly. "I do. I don't know how." Sarah studied her for a moment, her expression softening. "That's a start," she said. "Change isn't easy, Yvette. It's uncomfortable, and it forces you to confront parts of yourself you might not like. But it's worth it." Yvette nodded slowly, her posture less rigid now. "Thank you," she said, her voice tinged with sincerity. Sarah gave a small nod. "This isn't about me forgiving you," she said. "It's about you deciding what kind of person you want to be moving forward. That choice is yours." With that, Sarah turned and walked into the lounge, leaving Yvette to reflect on her words. Inside the lounge, Sarah took a seat by the window, the sunlight streaming in and casting long shadows across the polished floor. She watched as planes taxied on the runway, their engines humming faintly in the distance. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment of quiet. The fight wasn't over, but she could see the ripple effects of her actions beginning to take hold. And that, she thought, was how real change began. The morning was quiet, the sunlight veiled by soft clouds that diffused the sky into a muted gray. Sarah sat at her desk in the corner office of the airline's headquarters, a place she now commanded with quiet authority. In front of her lay a detailed report summarizing the progress made since she took control. The heading on the first page caught her eye: Cultural Transformation at Continental Airlines, a New Beginning. Sarah's fingers brushed against the paper as she scanned the data. 90% of employees had completed the diversity and inclusion training. Passenger surveys reflected a 60% increase in satisfaction, particularly among minority groups. But it wasn't the statistics that held her attention. It was the small, handwritten notes scattered throughout the page's employees expressing gratitude for the opportunity to grow, passengers sharing stories of being treated with newfound respect. These moments of change were what drove her. Later that afternoon, Sarah attended a critical follow-up meeting with the airline's board of directors. The conference room was grand, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the sprawling cityscape below. The board members, some cautiously optimistic, others skeptical, sat waiting as Sarah entered with an air of calm control. "Good afternoon," Sarah greeted them, taking her place at the head of the table. The chairman cleared his throat, initiating the meeting. "Miss Kincaid, we've reviewed the progress reports you submitted. The results are promising, but we'd like to hear your perspective." Sarah nodded, placing her hands flat on the table. "What we've achieved so far is encouraging, but let me be clear, this is just the beginning. Sustainable change requires consistent effort, and it's up to every one of us in this room to ensure we uphold the standards we've set." One of the board members, Maxwell, leaned forward, his expression guarded. "Miss Kincaid, I don't disagree that change is necessary, but the measures you've implemented have come at a significant cost. We've had pushback from certain teams, and frankly, some feel these policies are too aggressive." Sarah turned her gaze to Maxwell, her voice steady and firm. "Cost?" she repeated. "Let me remind you of the cost of inaction. A single incident of discrimination, a single passenger treated unfairly, can spiral into irreparable damage to our reputation and our bottom line." The room grew silent. She continued, her tone unwavering. "What we're doing here isn't about optics. It's about creating a culture where respect and dignity aren't optional. If that requires discomfort, so be it. Real change is never easy, but it's always worth it." Maxwell looked away momentarily, disarmed by her conviction. Another board member, Elaine, spoke up. "I agree with Miss Kincaid. The data speaks for itself. We've already seen significant improvement in employee morale and passenger feedback. If we abandon this now, we risk undoing everything we've worked for." The chairman nodded slowly, his gaze shifting between Sarah and the rest of the board. "It's decided then. We'll proceed with the next phase of implementation." Sarah allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. The room buzzed with murmurs as the board members adjourned, but Sarah remained seated for a moment longer, her hands resting calmly on the table. Later that day, Sarah visited the airport lounge for an impromptu inspection. As she entered, the atmosphere felt markedly different from her first visit. Staff greeted her with genuine smiles, their movements purposeful and professional. Near the counter, she spotted Yvette, the flight attendant whose actions had sparked the entire ordeal. Yvette was tidying up the guest area, her posture more relaxed than Sarah remembered. When she noticed Sarah, she hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Miss Kincaid," Yvette said softly, her tone a far cry from the condescension it once carried. "Yvette," Sarah replied, her expression neutral but not unkind. "I just wanted to say," Yvette paused, searching for the right words, "thank you for giving me a second chance. The training sessions were eye-opening. I didn't realize how much I had to learn about my own biases." Sarah studied her for a moment, then nodded, acknowledging that is the first step. The real work comes next, applying what you've learned every day. Yvette straightened, her face earnest. "I understand, and I'll do better. I promise." Sarah offered her a faint smile. "Good. That's all I ask." That evening, back in her office, Sarah received a call from a prominent journalist. The reporter wanted to cover the changes Sarah had implemented, to highlight her leadership and the airline's transformation. But Sarah declined. "This isn't about me," she said firmly. "The story here is about a company willing to face its flaws and rebuild, and about the people who chose to grow instead of resist." As the call ended, Sarah leaned back in her chair, gazing out at the city lights twinkling below. She thought of her parents, who had taught her the value of resilience and integrity. She thought of the passengers who had now experienced the dignity they deserved. And she thought of herself, not as someone who had arrived, but as someone just beginning. "This is only the start," Sarah whispered to herself, her reflection in the glass resolute. "There's still so much more to do." The city lights shimmered in the distance, a reminder of the endless possibilities ahead. And with that, Sarah Kincaid, a force of change and a beacon of resilience, prepared for the next chapter in her journey. Sarah's journey is proof that standing up against injustice can create waves of change far beyond what anyone expects. Her strength and determination didn't just challenge a single incident. They reshaped an entire culture and inspired others to do the same. If this story moved you, or gave you something to think about, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience, justice, and unexpected triumphs, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's so much more to come, and you won't want to miss it.